Alright, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We started Surah Shu'ara, and we talked about Pharaoh and how he was preparing himself to stand up against Musa alayhi salam. So we're just going to go over it really quick. So let's see. Musa alayhi salam, he said, قَالَ رَبِّي إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُكَذِّبُونِ. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had anointed him, chosen him to be the one to stand up against the Pharaoh. So what does he do? He basically says, I'm afraid that they will deny. I'm afraid that they will reject my words. But of course, it's not that he was considered about his life, but he was considered about them rejecting the words that Prophet Musa is going to be coming with. And that's why he said, قَالَ رَبِّي أَخَافُ إِنِّي أَخَافُ أَن يُكَذِّبُونِ. I fear that they might deny my words. And then he was also considerate, وَيَضِيقُ صَدْرِي. And then he would have that burden feeling, the feeling of the tightness feeling in the chest, and where, in other words, anxiety. And then that would affect his ability to fully speak the truth. ولا ينطلق لساني. And that I would not be able to say the truth, and my tongue. ينطلق لساني is a metaphor in where be able to speak eloquently and actually clearly say the words that Allah Almighty had ordered him to say. So he said, well then, therefore, send my brother Harun. And one thing, he then said, وَلَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ. There's actually a crime that I had committed, a crime. لَهُمْ عَلَيَّ ذَنْبٌ فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ. And I would fear that they might kill me for that crime. What is the crime? That is the crime based on the Pharaoh's law. At the time they considered, and the Pharaoh had laid out a law that everyone was supposed to work for him and was supposed to be glorifying him. If you're not working for the Pharaoh, then you're not considering him as the God, or at least the one to be on behalf of God Almighty. So he said, فَأَخَافُ أَن يَقْتُلُونَ. But him fearing that they would kill him is not in fear of killing him per se, as much as he is afraid that, again, he's afraid that that might actually bring an end to the mission that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent him with. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds, قَالَ كَلَّا. Verily not, absolutely not, such a thing will not happen. فَاذْهَبَا بِآيَاتِنَا. فَاذْهَبَا, and here semicolon, فَاذْهَبَا, then go with my words, with my signs, with the words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said. إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ مُسْتَمِعُونَ. We, and of course we talked about, this is just a revision now, so 2 minutes have passed. إِنَّا مَعَكُمْ مُسْتَمِعُونَ. We are now listening to you. We're listening to the conversation. And here مُسْتَمِعُونَ is telling Prophet Musa alayhi salam, giving him that comfort that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware, is listening to the conversation, and therefore Musa alayhi salam should not be afraid, should not be worried about not the message and not the way that they might react, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there, present, listening to the whole event and the whole conversation right there. فَأْتِيَا فِرْعَوْنَ. فَأْتِيَا فِرْعَوْنَ. So come to the Pharaoh. And why did he say come to the Pharaoh? Because when you want to do da'wah, you go yourself. Don't expect them to necessarily come to you. Go to the Pharaoh and tell him, we are the messengers of the Lord of, or the Lord of the worlds. Why did he say Lord of the worlds? That's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted the Pharaoh and those that are listening to understand that even if the Pharaoh had thought that he was God, he might control a specific area, but a true God would be the Lord of the worlds and is capable of controlling everything, and is capable of actually starting life, and is capable of ending life, and is capable of continuing life. And أرسل معنا بني إسرائيل. Send with us بني إسرائيل, the children of Israel, children of Prophet Yaqub alayhi salam. قال ألم نربك فينا وليدا. Then his response, the response is with, that is the Pharaoh. Did we not raise you as a young child? In other words, how dare you go against my orders, and how dare you go against the monarchy? In other words, the kingdom and everything that I actually have full authority over. Did we not raise you as a young child, and you even stayed longer than your childhood, and you stayed in our castle, you stayed in our fortress for a very long time. Min umrika sinin. What is he trying to do? He's basically trying to lay out the advantages and the different gratitudes that, of course, he wanted to tell Musa alayhi salam, that is the Pharaoh wanted to tell Musa alayhi salam, that you should be not only considering the good things that I have done, but this is one thing that you should be ashamed of, and you should be paying all that what is the word, but you should be considering giving me that loyalty. The loyalty should be to me, because I was the one that actually raised you as a young child and even let you stay and grow up in my fortress for a couple of years, even after your childhood. In other words, even after you hit puberty. And وَفَعَلْتَ فَعْلَتَكَ الَّتِي فَعَلْتَ وَأَنْتَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. And he said, in the crime that you did, I dismissed it, in other words. And وَأَنْتَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. And you're just one of a person that denies gratitude. Here, al-kafirin is not kafir to mean the kafir that denies faith, but it means two things. So al-kafirin here, that the Pharaoh was trying to tell him that you're a man lacking morality, because you did not even consider the blessing that I had given you. You didn't even pay me back for the gratitude. You didn't even have the adab, that is, of actually considering what I had given you. وَفَعَلْتَ فَعْلَتَكَ الَّتِي فَعَلْتَ وَأَنْتَ مِنَ الْكَافِرِينَ. And you're just here, somebody that is denying the gratitude, somebody that is denying the good things that I had given you. And here, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, قَالَ فَعَلْتُهَا إِذًا وَأَنَا مِنَ الضَّالِّينَ, said, yeah, and I killed that person, and so I did it. وَأَنَا مِنَ الضَّالِّينَ. In other words, ضالين here is actually that went astray, but not went astray based on Islam or the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but based on the laws that the Pharaoh was ruling by. فَفَرَرْتُ مِنْكُمْ. I ran away from you when I feared for my life, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had gifted me, had granted me حُكْمًا. Hukman means rule, and it can also mean wisdom, and it can also mean power. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given me power, and here it's actually referring to prophethood. وَجَعَلَنِي مِنَ الْمُرْسَلِينَ, and made me be a messenger or a prophet. Alright, فَوَهَبَ لِي رَبِّي حُكْمًا, meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him power, given him the ability to judge based on the rules of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَتِلْكَ نِعْمَةٌ, as for, that is, وَتِلْكَ نِعْمَةٌ, and as for the blessing. Now, notice that Prophet Musa alayhi salam did admit that it was a blessing to live in his fortress and in his castle, but at the same time, he hits it back to him, and he said, you're here, putting it in my face and trying to tell me that this is such a gratitude that you had given me. And the only reason why that happened is really because you had enslaved the children of Israel. In other words, my mother would have not needed to throw me in that bassinet and throw me in the river and throw me in that water, if only the only reason why she was motivated to do so was really to protect me from the brutality that you were living in, that you were practicing. That was the only reason why my mother had actually put me in that place. قال فرعون وما رب العالمين. Now the Pharaoh, Did he really respond to Prophet Musa when he said, well, the only reason why I was actually put in that water and why I ended up being in your fortress is really because of the brutality that you were practicing? So what did he say? Pharaoh doesn't respond to that. So he said, وَمَا رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. And what is the Lord of the worlds that you're talking about? That is, Prophet Musa alayhi salam then responds. Why did he focus on the word? So if you notice that the Pharaoh, you could see that he also had, despite of his ignorance, but he also had some kind of intelligence, by the way, that what we know of today, policy, we could see that he was skilled in some different skills to be a ruler, by the way. So let's not think that the Pharaoh was necessarily in his position only because he happened to be inheriting that power. Clearly, he inherited also some skill to govern and to control. So that's why the Pharaoh, he understood that وَمَا رَبُّ الْعَالَمِينَ. He focused on the word. He didn't focus on the word messenger, but he focused on the word, all right, so what is the Lord of the worlds? What was he really trying to question here? He wasn't in the position to learn. He was in a position, and the Pharaoh was more in a position to prove against Prophet Musa alayhi salam. He was trying to put down Prophet Musa alayhi salam and question his loyalty to the Pharaoh. Why was he wanting to question the loyalty? Because he was there seeing that there is this new idea that is becoming against his philosophy of what it means to be loyal and what it means to keep his throne intact. And he was making the people believe that he was God. And people were practicing their life and were accepting slavery because they really believed that he had the power of God. And that's why the first thing that the Pharaoh focused on, and what is the Lord of the worlds? Prophet Musa alayhi salam says he's the Lord of the heavens and the earth and everything that is in between it. Why did Prophet Musa alayhi salam respond to it? Because he wanted to show the listeners that this man that you see in front of you cannot control not the heavens, not the earth, and not what is in between them. In other words, he himself is actually part of the things that are on and living in this world and this life. In kuntum muqinin. And of course, in kuntum muqinin is to actually tell him, well, if you only would really be so sure in where you would define what it means to be God, if you are really understanding the definition of what a God is, you would recognize that he must be the Lord of the heavens and the Lord of the earth and what is in between them. In other words, if he controls their existence and if he controls the making of those things, then he controls the function that they are in. In other words, their function. And if he controls their beginning, he controls وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا, the things and how they function, then he controls their ending. قَالَ لِمَنْ حَوْلَهُ أَلَا تَسْتَمِعُونَ. The Pharaoh then, of course, gets angry because he didn't know how to respond to it. He didn't know how to respond to the whole definition of what makes a God. So then the Pharaoh gets into a totally different topic. And he says to all the people that were surrounding him, أَلَا تَسْتَمِعُونَ. Can't you hear what he just said? In other words, he was trying to put him in a position to lose confidence, in a position of ridicule, in a position of fear as well. قال ربكم ورب آبائكم الأولين. Now, it is very common, and I mentioned that before, is that atheists, for example, and in different groups, when they want to put you down, they will put you in place of ridicule, in place of mockery, in place of trying to make you lose your confidence. And that is not necessarily showing and is not necessarily evidence that proves that these people have a real rational argument or a good standing argument. Many times, it's just a way to make you lose your confidence in your faith. It's not that they necessarily have an argument. It's not that they necessarily have a point to prove, but that's more of a psychological war, if you would want to call it, or explain it as a psychological war in order to win the argument by winning the narrative. And here, Prophet Musa ﷺ was not shaken. He responded again to the same point that he was trying to point out. He said, he's the Lord he's your Lord and the Lord of your forefathers and your ancestors that came before you. In other words, and if you want you to look at this one, so here he was discussing the actual materialistic side of it, the actual creation of things. And here he was discussing the time of it, because what puts in physics, when you've got different dimensions, the dimension of the actual thing that exists and what puts in the energy that makes things function and that makes it function together and how they correlate with one another. But there's also time related to it. Time is another dimension that we always have to keep in mind. In where he says, your Lord and the Lord of your ancestors, in other words, time, your Lord and the Lord that is actually controlling time, the past, and the future. And in other words, he can't be a Lord because he himself was actually brought within a specific time. He can't be a Lord because he himself is actually happens to be a subject within all this creation itself. And this is really important. When we actually speak of time, that's the same thing when we speak of who created Allah. Well, Allah is beyond time, because time itself is actually another dimension of that creation. So we cannot speak about material without speaking about time that puts that material in function and how it loses energy with time. Time is a very important thing. That's why even in Islam, even in the Quran, you could always see that time, wal asr, wal fajr, wal duha, wal layl, it is always using and reminding us of time, that time is a very important creation. Time itself is a creature. Time itself is a creature. That is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even says, خَلَقَ الْمَوْتَ وَالْحَيَاةَ لِيَبْلُوَكُمْ. Therefore, life and death are both creatures in order to test us. So when we look at time, time is also a creature. So to question about, for example, how old is God or etc., that's why even when you go back to Ayat al-Kursi, Allahu la ilaha illa huwa al-Hayy al-Qayyum. There's always al-Hayy al-Qayyum, the one that is eternal, the one that was alive and was al-awwal, was al-akhir, the beginning and the end, the first and the last, etc. There's always the issue of time. There's al-hayat and there's al-dunya. Let's talk about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah la ilaha illa huwa al-hayy al-qayyum, la ta'khudhuhu sinatun wa la nawm. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not even the beginning of a sleep, not even weakness, not any type of weakness. Why? Because with anything that you want to claim is God, it's always going to come across the reality that we know about the thermodynamics in where you will lose energy. But God Almighty does not lose energy and therefore does not lose life and therefore does not actually fit within the laws of creation that we know in the laws of physics that's surrounding us. So the creation of the matter and also the laws and the time that governs matter, all those different things are actually part of the creation. لا تأخذه سنة ولا نوم له ما في السماوات وما في الأرض من ذا الذي يشفع عنده إلا بإذنه. Now here, not only does he control the matter, but also controls the function and the time that relates to matter. قال إن رسولكم الذي أرسل إليكم لمجنون. So what does he now do? Then the Pharaoh, he couldn't respond to it. Prophet Musa alayhi salam was laying out the different arguments, but the Pharaoh continued to use the same tactic that he used before in trying to ridicule, bring fear, at least not only in Prophet Musa, but even the people around him. قال إن رسولكم الذي أرسل إليكم لمجنون. You could see when people would use some profanity or ridiculing or some type of mean words, it's usually because they are angry. So the Pharaoh clearly is here holding some anger. He didn't know how to respond. So he says, the messenger that was sent to you is a lunatic. Did he respond to anything? He didn't. So he wanted to claim that he was, that is the Pharaoh himself, that he had some rationality, some understanding, some mind, some insight, by trying to claim that Prophet Musa alayhi salam was the one that was crazy, lunatic, irrational. Why? Because he didn't want to seem irrational in claiming to be God after what Prophet Musa alayhi salam had defined what a God really is. So then he wants to flip the argument. Instead of looking like an irrational person, he will use the tactic to say, you're irrational. You are here losing the argument. You're a lunatic. And that's the same tactic that many times, mentioned that before, many times they will say, if they want to claim that you're somehow the one that's trying to be controlling, etc., they'll actually call you a terrorist, even though they're the ones that are terrorizing people with their colonization, with all those different things. But they'll claim that you're a terrorist. That way they can run away. And of course, the one that lays out the narrative is usually the one that gets to define the narrative. The one that uses the word is the one that gets to define the word. So it is left. Right now, for example, the West was the one that created the term terrorist, so they ended up the ones to define a terrorist. It's every single person that looks like a Muslim that is standing against our Western values. Why Western values? Not, for example, somebody that stands against people's values, like you standing against my values. And you guys know the rest. Same thing. In order to claim that they are free, they'll accuse you of being backward. And the list goes on and on. Well, this kind of tactic, it usually happens to work on a lot of laymen, a lot of communities, and the PR relations and the media is often used in order to lay out this narrative and to let its way in, of course, what their movies, cartoons, and the list goes on and on, to let it, even if the philosophy of it is not necessarily used in a jargon or in an academic way, but it will come across It will come across in the masses, behavior, in where they will be worried about practicing their Islam because they don't want to be called backward. She's afraid of wearing hijab because she's afraid of being called oppressed or being called not modern, etc., then they will be the ones to lay out the meaning, the narrative, the definition, and many will lose their confidence in that way. And it happens to cross on many people. They will lose, and especially when the predominant community is practicing a different behavior or a different practice, etc. And then the children, the young generation, usually fall with that psychological war that is practiced on them without them realizing, and they will fall for it. And that's where the danger takes place. So the Pharaoh was using the same style. قال رب المشرق والمغرب وما بينهما. Now Prophet Musa alayhi salam, even though the Pharaoh was using that tactic, Prophet Musa alayhi salam continues with the same idea. He's the Lord of the East and the West and all that is in between it. In kuntum taqilun, if you were really to think about it. And this is, again, Prophet Musa alayhi salam was not afraid of that word majnoon, lunatic. He instead wanted to use the same exact word and actually say, well, speaking of rationality, speaking of mind, if you were to really think about it, the Lord, and speaking about defining who the Lord is going to be the Lord of the East and the West. In other words, the world is a lot more expensive than your monarchy, Mr. King, than your kingdom, Mr. King. The world is actually expensive, where it will reach out to the far east and the far west and what is in between them. Do you, Mr. King, actually have that type of kingdom where you rule to the expansive east and the expansive west and what is in between them? Now, قال لئن اتخذت إلها غيري. Definitely. The Pharaoh is now not only angry after calling him a majnoon, but is right now getting stronger in his anger and is right now getting even more furious. And he says, well, if you take another god other than me, لأجعلنك من المسجونين. I will then imprison you. Why did he want to imprison him after actually saying all that? Well, what he wanted to say was, well, regardless of all the rationality that you carry, there's only one argument that's going to pass. There's only one idea. There's only one idea that is going to rule in my kingdom. And if you don't follow it, I will imprison you. Now, using the tactic, same thing. If you don't follow my way, I will force you to follow my way. I will force you to do as I tell you, because if you don't, then that's a threat to my kingdom. قال أولو جئتك بشيء مبين. Prophet Musa alayhi salam said, did I not come with a very clear matter? In other words, I explained it. I defined it for you. I explained every single point for you. I defined what a God is, and I talked about the philosophy. I talked about the physics of it, and I explained to you every single corner of it. And I proved to you that you cannot be a God or even have the power of God whatsoever. In other words, all your power is being dismantled right in front of you with that simple logic. Did I not come with, it's too clear. I clarified it for you. قال فأتي به إن كنت من الصادقين. Now, the Pharaoh is not necessarily wanting evidence, but he's wanting here to say, well, regardless, in other words, even if you try to bring me all the evidence, you're still going to be imprisoned, you're still going to be considered as a threat, and therefore I'm still going to deal with you with all my force to end your threat against my kingdom. But he just said, well, regardless, I'm still going to do that to you. So, فَأْتِ بِهِ إِن كُنْتَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ. Bring me the proof if you really are honest about it. And even though when he says, إِن كُنْتَ مِنَ الصَّادِقِينَ, he's like, you know what? I don't believe it, but bring whatever you can. You're still going to be imprisoned. Go ahead and bring it. Prophet Musa alayhi salam then, فَأَلْقَى عَصَاهُ. The word فَأَلْقَى means it's to let, to drop. فَأَلْقَى عَصَاهُ, dropped his cane. And then فَإِذَا. Now the letter fa actually tells you that there was no time lapse. Instantly, his cane turns into a ثعبان مبين. The word ثعبان means a massive and a great snake. But it becomes clear to him that this was a real snake and not a delusion. And that's why it said ثعبان مبين. The Pharaoh was then sure that this was a real snake, not a delusion, not some sort of a make-believe. وَنَزَعَ يَدَهُ. Then he also takes his hand out of his, it's not the pocket, but it is more in the chest area, and he takes it puts it inside, takes it out, and then فَإِذَا هِيَ بَيْضَاءُ لِلنَّاظِرِينَ. It becomes glowing with light. Now, in another ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually said that it is not of any type of an illness. In other words, it's not that some kind of pigments losing color, because Prophet Musa alayhi salam was actually a black prophet. He was an African prophet. In other words, of course, Egypt is from Africa, and he was actually dark, even based on the hadith. And Prophet Musa alayhi salam, when he gets his hand out and it is white and not out of any illness, but it was glowing light, لِلنَّاظِرِينَ, clearly that people were able to see the glowing hand right before their eyes. قال للملأ حوله إن هذا لساحر عليم. Then he tells the people, now I want you to look at the word al-mala. Al-mala, the different ministers, the different people in power that are supporting him to be in the position that he's in. But of course, he's telling them in order to enforce his power, because your power cannot be sustained without the people that are surrounding you, without their support. That's why he needed all the different the different ministers and the different Haman and all those different people surrounding him to sustain him with money, to sustain him with ideas, to sustain him with so many different things. He was definitely a man of power. He knew exactly what it takes to govern any area. So he was keeping these people to support his throne. قال للملأ حوله إن هذا لساحر عليم. So then he tells the people around him, إن هذا لساحر. He's just a magician that is alim, that is very well trained in practicing magic. I'm trying to look at the word sahir. Now the word, why did he say sahir and not something else? Well, there are a number of different things. Number one is that the word sihr, or magic, which is actually the same exact accusation that Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was accused with, that he had some ability in practicing black magic. And the reason why they would accuse of doing black magic is really because it is clear to them that this is a supernatural thing, that this is beyond nature. It's beyond human capacity. It's something that has to do with an outside power. So that's why he says he is practicing magic because he wants to accuse that the power that Prophet Musa alayhi salam is coming with is not a power from the outside world coming from God, but coming from evil spirits. So that's the same thing that Prophet Musa alayhi salam, that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was accused with. That they recognized that it was supernatural, that recognized that it was beyond human capacity. But they wanted to say that, yes, this beyond human capacity power is coming from an evil spirit and not necessarily a God. It can't be from God. In other words, they recognized that it's beyond human capacity. But they didn't want to recognize that what comes behind this beyond human capacity action is God himself. So then, the Pharaoh practices another form of, again, psychological war. So the Pharaoh then wants to claim because he's seeing that people are starting to accept that argument somehow. So what does the Pharaoh say? يريد أن يخرجكم. Now he wants to not only claim that he was a magician, but he wants to doubt not only his loyalty to the king, but he wants the masses to believe that Prophet Musa alayhi salam is a threat to their security. And this is again a tactic used against the Muslims today as well, in order to call them against human rights. Sharia law is against human rights. Sharia law is against your freedom, your security, and the list goes on and on. The same exact tactic is used in order to make people afraid of even using the word Sharia. Just the word Sharia on its own. Muslims are right now afraid of even using the word Sharia because they have become subject to all that mass media that they themselves believed the massive lie, that it's a threat to humanity. So then, what does the Pharaoh say? The motive and the reason why Musa is doing all this is because he wants to expel you out of your country. In other words, he wants to get you out of your land. He wants to cause in another ayah, in where the Pharaoh, in another ayah, he actually says, well, I'm just here trying to protect you and preserve you, that Musa is only wanting to practice fasad fil ard. He wants to practice some kind of a threat, some kind of take you away. You read in another ayah in where that إني أخاف أن يبدل دينكم أو أن يظهر في الأرض الفساد. The Pharaoh, I'm afraid that he wants to change your religion. In other words, he's going to delude you into believing in nonsense things. And my concern as a king is that إني أخاف أن يبدل دينكم. I'm worried that he will change all the good principles that you stand on, that you are loyal to. أو أن يظهر في الأرض الفساد. And I'm worried that he might practice some form of fasad, some form of destruction in this world. In other words, bring threat against humanity, against your financial and your economical stability. And I'm really concerned about that. Who's speaking? Well, that's the Pharaoh himself. Sure sounds very familiar to me. يريد أن يخرجكم من أرضكم بسحره فماذا تأمرون. Now, the Pharaoh wants to seem somehow democratic, wants to seem somehow that he's not authoritative. So he says, well, he wants to expel you from your country. In other words, he's trying to cause destruction, economical destruction, political destruction, and social destruction, and even principle and philosophical destruction. What would you suggest? فماذا تأمرون? And of course he used the word تأمرون. What do you order me to do? In other words, he wanted to pretend that he was really under their command and not that they are under his command. Again, look at that type of mischievous practice that the Pharaoh was using. قالوا أرجه. So they said, أرجه, delay him and his brother. And then وابعث. إبعث means send out, massive. وابعث في المدائن حاشرين. Send out to the different cities. In other words, all the different provinces that you own, all the different provinces that you control, send out massive announcements. What? يأتوك بكل سحار عليم. Massive announcements. Hiring. We are looking for great and very practiced and very well knowledge about magicians. They have to be very well informed and great in their actions. فجمع السحرة لميقات يوم معلوم. Then the magicians, they gather and they join. Everyone is actually very excited about presenting their abilities in magic. Why? Because they wanted to support the kingdom, but they also wanted really the good pay, and they wanted to be in a special position. لميقات يوم معلوم, for a specific appointment, for a specific time. And then notice that the ayah didn't continue to really tell us all the different details, but clearly it was something that the king had made all the different efforts to make sure that he's gathering the right people. The magicians that are chosen are the most experienced. وقيل للناس هل أنتم مجتمعون. Then قيل للناس, the people are talking to each other, and everyone is excited about gathering and watching this big contest that is coming up. قيل للناس هل أنتم مجتمعون. Everyone is actually discussing between themselves. Everyone is prepared and everyone is talking about this massive event. Are you going to be coming? Are you going to be attending? هل أنتم مجتمعون? Are you going to be attending? Is everyone coming? Who's coming and who's not? And everybody is excited. Why that excitement? Because we are up for a magnificent meeting here. And of course, لعلنا نتبع السحرة إن كانوا هم الغالبين. Maybe we will follow the magicians. And here, notice that maybe, لعلنا, perhaps, it's telling you that they were not in full belief of what the magicians and what the Pharaoh is standing for. They had some kind of doubt, but they just wanted something to support their doubt and to make them confident in the lie, that they were really aware of its delusion and its lie. But they wanted something to support their belief. إن كانوا هم الغالبين, if they win this contest, maybe perhaps it will follow them. Perhaps it will get us stronger. فلما جاء السحرة قالوا لفرعون هإن لنا لأجرا إن كنا نحن الغالبين. Then when the magicians came, you could see delegates coming to the Pharaoh. If we actually come and we actually win this contest, will we get a pay for this? The Pharaoh responds, قال نعم, absolutely, yes. وإنكم إذن لمن المقربين. And not only that, but you will be the ones to be VIPs. إِذًا مِنُ الْمُقَرَّبِينَ. You will be very close to me in my kingdom. In other words, you will be the ones to be near my kingdom. You will be the ones to be near my throne. You will have a special position, very important persons. You will be the VIP here. قال لهم موسى, Prophet Musa alayhi salam said to them, ألقوا ما أنتم ملقون. Throw what you wanted to throw. In other words, throw the magic. Present it. Lay it out. Let everyone see it. فألقوا حبالهم وعصيهم وقالوا بعزة فرعون إنا لنحن الغالبون. They threw the different ropes and the different canes that they had. Why ropes and canes? Because the Pharaoh knew that the magic was going to be something similar to what he had seen when Prophet Musa alayhi salam threw his cane. So he wanted something very similar to prove to the masses that it's the same type of magic. Prophet Musa alayhi salam standing with his brother and all the different people standing and all the different magicians right before them. فَأَلْقَوْا حِبَالَهُمْ وَعِصِيَّهُمْ. They threw their ropes and their canes and they said, by the izzah, by the dignity, by the power of the Pharaoh, we will win this contest. فَأَلْقَى مُوسَى عَصَاهُ. Prophet Musa alayhi salam throws his cane. Then the cane turns into a snake, that is. فَإِذَا هِيَ تَلْقَفُ مَا يَأْفِكُونَ. It gulps up, it swallows everything. مَا يَأْفِكُونَ. يَأْفِكُونَ means the magnificent or the big lie, the big blasphemy that they had created. And here, this is telling you that ma ya'fikun is telling us that the lie that they had brought, that the magic that they were doing is extremely strong magic. And then, فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سَاجِدِينَ. فَأُلْقِيَ. Notice here, we've got ulqiya, we've got alqaw. It all comes from the same word, in where it is to throw, it is to make it a fast move and somewhat of a strong move. فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سَاجِدِينَ. Then the magicians, they just threw themselves on the ground in a form of prostration. قالوا آمنا برب العالمين. And they all said, we believe in the Lord of the worlds, رب موسى وهارون, the Lord of Musa and Harun. Now, of course, the furious king gets angry. Did you believe in him before I had even given you the permission to do so? He is nothing but the one that is leading you. He's the big one of you. He's the big magician that actually taught you this magic, and you will see what I will do to you. فَلَسَوْفَ تَعْلَمُونَ. You will see what I will do to you. لَأُقَطِّعَنَّ أَيْدِيَكُمْ. I will chop up your hands and your legs from the opposite. In other words, your right leg and your left hand and the opposite from different positions. وَلَأُصَلِّبَنَّكُمْ أَجْمَعِينَ. And I will crucify all of you. In another ayah, that Pharaoh, that في جذوع النخل, he will لأصلبنكم في جذوع النخل, like it will be so tight that جذوع النخل, the different branches of the palm trees will go deep into your skin and let you be part of that. قالوا لا ضير إنا إلى ربنا منقلبون. Then the Pharaoh, then the magician said, لا ضير, doesn't even harm us. Now they were strong. Doesn't even harm us. Their faith is so strong. That won't even scare us. That won't even change the position that we're in. That will not change our faith. إِنَّا إِلَىٰ رَبِّنَا مُنْقَلِبُونَ. Anyways, our return is to the Lord Almighty. In other words, قالوا فَأَقْضِ مَا أَنْتَ قَاضٍ. Just like in another ayah, إِنَّمَا تَقْضِي هَذِهِ الْحَيَاةُ الدُّنْيا. Rule as you want, judge as you want. All you get to rule is in this world, but in the akhirah, in the judgment day, إنما تقضي هذه الحياة الدنيا. You only judge in this life, and on judgment day you have no power whatsoever. In other words, your power is limited. We'll feel the pain now, but the real matter and what really matters is on judgment day. So they said, Inna ila rabbina munqalibun. Our return is to the Lord Almighty. Inna natma'u an yaghfira lana rabbuna khatayana. For inna natma'u, we look forward that the Lord Almighty will forgive our sins. And we are the first of the believers. Of course, it's not that they're the first of the believers, because they were definitely the first of their believers during their time. And kunna awwal al-mu'minin. We're going to be the first to believe. We're going to be amongst the believers. We're going to be the first to actually be believers in Musa and Harun and the Lord Almighty, and even reject all the blasphemy that you're coming with. وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى أَنْ أَسْرِ بِعِبَادِي. Prophet Musa alayhi salam was given a message through Jibril alayhi salam to go, of course, Musa alayhi salam, to take this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's servants, and here which servants? Bani Israel who were believing, and also the magicians who were also believing. That's why the ayah said bi'ibadi, my servants. Innakum muttaba'un. Take my servants, you will be followed. Keep going. Go. فأرسل فرعون في المدائن حاشرين. The Pharaoh then lays out his intelligence, all those different intelligence people, all those people that are within his government. Gather all those that are going to be going against me. Bring them to me. Imprison them. This is the Pharaoh, along with his soldiers. إِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ لَشِرْذِمَةٌ قَلِيلُونَ. And he also wanted to also not show that he was afraid of them. He said, oh, those are just shirdima. They're just a small minority. A minority that is a very trivial minority. Nothing to be worried about. وَإِنَّهُمْ لَنَا لَغَائِظُونَ. But they're definitely getting us angry. They're definitely going against us. وَإِنَّا لَجَمِيعٌ حَاذِرُونَ. We're all going to be united against this group, even if it's a small minority, but we're going to be united. What is the Pharaoh trying to do? He's trying to make not only, and this is another tactic that many would use, in where he will not only make the people feel that they are working for him, but he will make the people feel that this is their matter, that this is their purpose as well. وَإِنَّا لَجَمِيعٌ حَاذِرُونَ. We're all going to be very considerate. حَاذِرُونَ. The word حَاذِرُونَ is like we're all going to be very considerate. We're all going to be very careful about this group that is right now working against us and probably becoming a massive danger. فَأَخْرَجْنَاهُمْ مِنْ جَنَّاتٍ وَعُيُونٍ. The Pharaoh was taken out. Why? He was taken out from Jannat wa'uyun, from the different gardens and the different water flowing that was around his castle and around the city that they were living in. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that the kingdom that the Pharaoh was ruling, the pyramids and all that, it really had massive gardens, flowing waters, and treasures, and it was definitely maqamin kareem. He was definitely living in a dignity that was in a high position amongst the people. He wasn't living like any other person. But it wasn't just those. It wasn't those that were in governance, but also it was also those that were living in that city. In other words, what today would be considered a civilization. Notice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did mention that they really had a strong civilization where there were gardens, there was clearly kunuz, economical stability, there was social stability as well, except for Bani Israel. And there were flowing waters, there was also good civil modernity in where it had all the different things. They definitely had good wealth, good stable economy. They definitely had growing civilization right before their eyes. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, they were exited out. The civilization that they had built, the modernity, all the different things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took them out of it. Why? Because they had rejected the Lord Almighty. كذلك وأورثناها بني إسرائيل. That is how. And that is why أورثناها بني إسرائيل. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had made Bani Israel be the ones to inherit it. فأتبعوهم مشرقين. They followed them مشرقين, early after sunrise. Why did they wait? Well, they thought nothing to worry about. We'll follow them second day. Let them go. We've got an army that's a tough and a mighty army. It will do the job. فلما ترى الجمعان قال أصحاب موسى إنا لمدركون. When they definitely did make it after them. They went early in the morning, in other words, after them, but the second day almost. And then when the two groups, that is the group of Prophet Musa alayhi salam and the group of the Pharaoh, they were now tara al-jam'an. They were able to see each other. The small minority of Prophet Musa alayhi salam and the magnificent army that was following them, they were now face to face with each other. قال أصحاب موسى إنا لمدركون. Prophet Musa alayhi salam's people, the people that Prophet Musa alayhi salam was with, they said they're going to be able to get a hold of us. لمدركون. They're going to reach us. They're going to get a hold of us. They're going to detain us. That is. قال كلا. Prophet Musa alayhi salam learned them a lesson. Remember when we looked at the ayah when Prophet Musa alayhi salam actually said, well, they're going to deny me, they're going to reject me, they're going to kill me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says, كلا. The same, now Prophet Musa alayhi salam just took once and he learned the lesson. Here it is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him, كلا. Now here, Prophet Musa alayhi salam, after learning the lesson, he knows that the Lord Almighty is the one to protect him. So he said, Kalla, verily not, absolutely not, such a thing will not happen. Why? Because the Lord Almighty had taught me that He is the one that's going to support me. Inna ma'iya Rabbi sayahdeen. No, verily not. They will not be able to reach us. They will not be able to detain us. They will not be able to get a hold of us. Inna ma'iya Rabbi. My Lord Almighty is with me. Sayahdeen. He will guide us to the best way and to the best idea, to the best way to get out of this. فَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَى مُوسَى. When Prophet Musa alayhi salam recognized this, then فَأَوْحَيْنَا, right away. أوحينا, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent a message to Prophet Musa, أن اضرب بعصاك البحر, hit that sea with your cane. فانفلق, then it split. It tore. The word in falaq, it split, it tore the sea right before their eyes. And then every part of the sea became like a magnificent mountain right before their eyes. And then the Pharaoh reached and was really close to them. وأنجينا موسى ومن معه أجمعين. And the Lord Almighty saved Musa and those that were with him. أجمعين. Not one was left behind. Not a single one. أجمعين. ثم أغرقنا الآخرين. Then the rest were drowned. The sea collapsed on both of them, on both of them, the king and his soldiers. إن في ذلك لآية. In that there is an ayah, there is a sign, there is a lesson, there is a miracle to learn. وما كان أكثرهم مؤمنين. Most of them, they did not believe, those that were with the Pharaoh. وإن ربك لهو العزيز الرحيم. Now, I would actually color this purple in this Quran. وإن ربك لهو العزيز الرحيم. The theme. To learn from all this that your Lord Almighty is not in need for even the group that was wanting to believe. Your Lord Almighty is not in need for them. And your Lord Almighty is most merciful. وَاتْلُ عَلَيْهِمْ نَبَأَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ. This will continue next week, inshallah. So that was the first segment. It was really the end of Prophet Musa alayhi salam's story. But then next week we'll be starting Prophet Ibrahim's story. And why did it get into another story? And why? And what is it? And what is it that makes these two stories actually be mentioned right after each other? And if it's not based on chronology, well, what is it based on? And what is the theme that these two stories have in common? This is it. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone. If there are any questions or even comments or even whatever have you, go ahead. You can unmute yourselves, and Jazakumullah khairan for attending. If anybody wants to say anything, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
والله كفيتي ووفيتي جزاك الله عنا كل خير.
حبيبة قلبي, الله يبارك فيك ويحفظك نفوس.
حبيبتي الله يسعدك.
All right. So I guess no one else wants to add anything. I'd be happy to even hear the people on Facebook as well if you would like to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I guess no one wants to add anything. Well, jazakumullah khairan, everyone, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. كيف انت؟
حبيت القصة؟ يلا شو سؤالك؟
نسيت عشان إلي 5
ما هي
questions
عشان
كل مرة بنساهم. عارف عن هذا ولا لا؟ تعرف عن هذا؟
نسيت عنه. تعرفي ليش أنا معصبة؟ عشان هيدا
ماما كل هذا على هيك.
حابة نروح محل اليوم. not شو اسمه. إيش رأيك أخذك اليوم على a place, يعني like a nice place. It's a good one. Oh my God. Yep, they're coming out. You don't gotta be patient. Okay, think of مثلا سباحة. Listen. Did it come out? You're such a good girl. عن جد بتحبيني؟
هذا سؤال.
استني.
Of course.
طيب إذا بتحبيني إيش بتحبي فيه أكثر شيء؟
خطوتك.
No, seriously, I don't have those big feet.
مش عارفة.
Really? So there's nothing public for you?
أنا أحبك بس أنا مش عارفة شو أحبك ولا شيء.
شو يا ماما؟ تعرفي يا ماما والله you're such a cute girl. بس يعني بس يعني yeah. عاد يا ماما لازم تغسلي وجهك كويس. تغسليش وجهك منيح بتخافي بينك من المية.
لا.
Oh yeah, that's why بتخافي من البركة.
No.
That's why بتخافي من البركة. روحي اغسلي وجهك منيح منيح منيح. عندي البلانك ماسك. You might be getting your period. I can tell من البول اللي طلعت لك. لما يصير يطلع في وجهك pimples, most likely you're getting close to your period. Oh wow. I know it looks so good. I'm trying to remove this weight. Walaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Believe it or not, but I actually forgot about it. So alhamdulillah. Hello? Okay. Just wasting my time.
We're on a family vacation and we...
Assalamu alaikum. Believe it or not, but I actually forgot about it until somebody tagged me in a post. I'm like, wait a minute, are they talking about me? But yeah, inshallah, we'll see you tomorrow. Looks so good. Looks so good.
Hey guys, today we're making the fluffiest Japanese style milk bread. This bread is unlike any other bread
I know.
you've ever tried. Just by looking at it, you can see how beautiful and tender these buns are. It's great with some butter on its own to accompany with dinner. Not only will you love it, but you'll be obsessed. So consider doubling the recipe. So to make my milk bread, you'll need, of course, some warm milk. And to that, we're going to add the yeast. I chose to make the dough by hand today just because I really want to show you guys that you don't need any special baking equipment to bake. But you can certainly use a stand mixer if you have one. In this other bowl, I have some flour, and I'm also going to add the sugar and the milk yeast mixture. And you want to start mixing the dough. When it starts to come together, you can add the salt. You always want to add the salt afterwards and not directly to your yeast because it can interfere with the rise in your dough. If you're new to my channel, make sure to subscribe and click the bell. I post new videos every week. Now, if you're using a stand mixer, you want to knead the dough for around 2 minutes. However, for those of you who are making the dough by hand like I am, you will eventually have to set the spatula aside and bring the dough together with your hands. This dough is actually one of the easiest doughs to work with. It will not stick to your hands. However, if you do find that it's a little bit tough, what you can do is cover it in plastic wrap and allow this to sit for around 20 minutes. The gluten will relax and it will be easier to knead. You're going to work the dough for around 5 minutes, and at this point you're going to flatten it out and add the soft butter. And you do want to make sure, guys, that the butter is soft and spreadable. Now, this will get a little bit messy unless obviously you're using a stand mixer because you will have to incorporate the butter into the dough. So what I like to do is fold the dough onto itself, trying to trap the butter inside the dough. This will take some patience and a few minutes. The butter will get onto your hands and onto your board. It's inevitable. And you don't want to leave any behind. So as you work it, Make sure you scrape any residual butter off your board. The dough will eventually start to become smooth and supple and beautiful. And at this point, you can transfer it into a greased bowl. You do also want to grease the top of the dough. Cover it well, and this needs to rise for around 2 hours. It needs to double in size. After 2 hours, your dough should have risen beautifully. You're going to transfer it onto a lightly, and I mean lightly, floured work area. You'll need less than a teaspoon of flour, and you're going to form your bread rolls. Now with this recipe, you'll be able to get around 12 buns. If you want to be really precise, you can weigh each bun. That way they're all the same size. You're going to place these onto a baking sheet, lined with parchment paper, leaving some space between each roll because these will rise again and continue to expand in the oven. So cover these again and allow them to rise for an additional 30 minutes. Now what makes this milk bread stand out against other breads, besides the texture of course, is its beautiful light milk color. These will look like buns sent from heaven. So to achieve that look, instead of brushing the tops with some egg wash, lightly dust the top with some cornstarch. This will give your buns this beautiful cloud-like bread look. Bake these in a preheated oven at 180 degrees Celsius or 350 Fahrenheit for around 18 to 20 minutes. Allow these to cool for 10 minutes and then dig in. You guys, you know a bread is good when you love to eat it even on its own.
She really
I'm
loves
very
food.
excited how many times I've been
عن جد she loves food. You can tell she just loves food. Heaven, مش عارف
so
شو.
amazingly well with anything. So make a lot and share these with your
She really
family
loves
and
food. You could tell food from
Lunch.
heaven. مش عارف شو. Let me see الشكل.
You look skinny.
She looks skinny. 2 million subscribers. You can see like food from heaven. مش عارف شو. You can tell she loves food. Food from heaven.
نعملها.
Yeah, go ahead. I don't have a problem. Oh, بإيدك كليتها شو اسمه بس وصي أظافرك يا ماما.
Fluffiest Japanese style milk. This bread is unlike any
بس
other bread.
غسلي ايديك يا ماما قصي
Just by
اظافرك
looking at it, you can
وبدي شمس ومشطي شعرك واربطي لي عشان ما بحبش الاقي شعر بالاكل.
butter on its own to accompany your dinner.
Not a lot of ingredients.
It's normal ingredients للخبز. يعني nothing great بس لازم تقصي اظافرك. وبعدين كيف مع الجرحة كيف بدك تسوي العجين؟ فيش عنا كفوف ايدين؟
أنا مرة قلت لك شو قلتي لي لا.
انا هلقيت بقدر اروح على ألدي عشان بدي اسوي الدجاج برضو هذاك. Do they have cloves? No. Do they? شوف الجرحة. بتحطي تيب وسوي.
Okay.
او اذا بدك بدل ما تقعدي بايدك تسوي هيك بالمشين.
عندي بإيدي.
بالمشين. اوكي. حطي